Welcome, everybody, to another episode of SynthCast. And in this episode, we have once again Trish Yule. Introduce yourself, Trish.
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me on SynthCast. I am Trish Yule in Chicago, founder of Owl's Ledge and creator of the Crypto Owls NFTs.
Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to go into the Synthverse to talk about something really exciting. We're going to be talking about the history of the web. Now, that's your Web 1, your Web 2, your Web 3, and who knows, maybe there's a Web 4 coming out there in the near future. But before we get into that, we need to get into the Synthverse. So are you ready to enter the Synthverse? Because how we do it? We do it this way. Pew, 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 pew. Okay, everybody, welcome to the Synthverse. With me as well is Trish Yule, or is she? Because you can't quite tell anymore, can you? Trish, tell people what we're going to be talking about today.
Ooh, well, I think you talked about it at the top here, and that is we are going to be talking about the differences between the history of the internet. So Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3.
Now, why do we have these numbers? Is it just because people are silly that way? I'm sure that when the inventor of the internet came up with this, he didn't put a number behind it. So we did that. What was the web in its earlier infancy when we think about that web first version, if you will?
So the numbers basically mark different epochs, and each epoch actually features a different mindset and then a different set of technology to go along with it. So the Web 1 technology is very different than the Web 2 technology, and Web 3 technology is very different than the technology that has come before. And the mindsets are very different with the web over time as well.
Tools and mindset. We'll just focus on those two to kind of keep it focused. When we think of Web 1, what were the tools and mindset that kind of defined what the first iteration of the web was?
So if we think of Web 1 as being the static websites of the 1990s, right? So if we think about the first web browser was actually created and launched in 1993. And so that actually, so people mix up the web and the internet, but the internet actually has different components to it, of which the World Wide Web is only one. And so even though the internet predates the World Wide Web, we started getting access to the World Wide Web in 1993 with the first web browsers. And those were static websites. Those were informational websites in Web 1 where you could read them, but you couldn't otherwise interact with them. And that's pretty much the signature of Web 1.
When we think of Web 2, the first thing that comes to mind for me is social, but that's a sidestep, if you will. What were some of the tools and mindsets, if you will, of that second iteration of the web?
Yeah, so good question. So Web 2 came in with user-generated content, right? So with the 1990s, we couldn't post anything. It was read-only. And with Web 2, it became read-write. So we could read the web content, the online content, and we could also write content. We could start creating and posting media to it. And yes, that started with social. We mostly think about it with social media. And this came in about 2003, 2004, 2005, like in the early 2000s. And a big catalyst actually for Web 2 was then the advent of smartphones and mobile phones now having access to the web at that time, and being able to facilitate people going online and then eventually being able to go into social media apps.
When I think of Web 2, I also think of platforms. There was a lot of big companies that came out, whereas, you were no longer dealing with, let's say, an IBM or something like that, or your own instance of a web Apache server or whatnot. You'd go to the cloud. This new cloud thing came in. Now, you kind of like the internet and the web in the first iteration were two different things. The web, as it relates to the cloud, also two different things, I would suspect.
Yeah, I would agree. And it has now facilitated, Web 2 has facilitated software as a service. So it used to be that we used to have to get, things on media like discs, like CDs and DVDs and floppy disks before that. And we used to have to install software, and now we get software as a service. So as a matter of fact, what we're filming on right now in being able to use Zoom is software as a service, right? So it's accessible from the cloud, and it has this broader availability. We don't have to worry about updates and those types of things, usually, at least as far as a manual process is concerned. But again, a lot of Web 2 from a mindset and a paradigm is really about this whole idea of now being able to contribute content and be able to share it widely. It's distribution online. But the thing about Web 2 technologies is that they're centralized.
Mm-hmm.
So to your point, it's platforms that are centralized in the content. So we might all post to LinkedIn, or we might all post to Twitter, or we might all post to Facebook, and before that, Friendster and MySpace. But those are platforms that are closed platforms that we're contributing content to. And that's a centralized environment.
Now, that word right there, I think, is one of the big things when we start talking about Web3, which is more of a decentralized structure. So same conversation, tools and mindset in a Web3. Now, this is still being defined as we speak in many ways. It's still early in the game, but we've got a general sense of where we think we're going with it. So give me your thoughts on that.
So Web3 exactly is decentralized. And that basically means that we now have ownership and have more control over the things that we publish or mint, in some cases, to Web3 platforms. So if we think about Web 1 again as being read, and we think about Web 2 as being read, write, Web 3 is about being read, write, and own. And so the big shift is that the decentralized technology and all of that tech architecture that's behind the Web3 platforms now gives us the abilities of being able to do the two M's. One M is media. We get more control over the media. And number two is being able to monetize. So we have more opportunities of, as the creators in the creative economy, being able to monetize our content without having to conform to the rules of the more centralized platforms of Web 2 and the restrictions on the monetization strategies that they've traditionally had in the Web 2 platforms.
Now, much like the Web 2 had all of the software as a service and various platforms that came out to kind of support the mindset, we're seeing some of this stuff starting to emerge right away now with Web 3, terms that we haven't used before, like DAOs and stuff like that. What are some of that circular aspect that will come with that Web 3 mindset, the peripheral techs and corporates, if you will?
So actually, that's a key theme, and it kind of folds into sustainability to some degree too. Because if we think about what's happening with sustainability in the broader context, so a lot of times when people think about sustainability initiatives, we think about things like climate crisis, we think about waste, we think about water scarcity, and all of those things are part of sustainability, but also part of sustainability is social. And when we're talking about social, that's why we've got this rise of social justice, of communities being able to have more control and being able to localize and being able to distribute equity. So we're seeing a lot of sustainability around Web3 and sort of this whole idea of a circular economy where kind of what goes around comes around, but in a good way. So how it is that we can, reuse and repurpose stuff. But it gives the control to the community and to the creators rather than taking the control and then placing all of the value and the valuation with centralized controls of the Web 2 platforms. And that's the really big deal about Web 3.
Well, there you go, everybody. A brief history, if you will, of the web and kind of its wider place in the world and the mindsets that come with it. What we're going to do is we're going to cut over to our assistant. She's going to wrap it up for us, hit you with a couple of more details, and in the next episode, we're going to deep dive into Web 3.
I'd like to share one of Dr. Vashmir's images from her Token Economy book to reinforce key points and visually summarize the history of Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. In the 1990s, Web 1, the Internet of Information, heralded in the information economy with the public launch of the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web was created by inventor and English computer scientist, Sir Tim Berners-Lee. The World Wide Web introduced a new standard that allowed for creating visually appealing web pages using just a few lines of code. The web changed the Internet user experience from command line interfaces to web pages. Web pages allowed for surfing the Internet using hyperlinks, making accessing information on the Internet more accessible to more people. Anyone could now use the Internet. It became referred to as the information superhighway and featured such apps as web browsers and search engines. As they say, history often rhymes. Just as in 1991 with Web 1, today's Web 3, based on blockchain, also introduces a new standard using cryptography and just a few lines of code, this time in the form of smart contracts and tokenizing digital assets stored in digital wallets. Today's cryptographically signed digital assets and pseudonym assigned digital wallets are yesterday's web pages, making it more accessible for more people to exchange digital goods and services on this next iteration of the Internet. Web 3 extends the revolution started by the Web 2 social web in the early 2000s through wikis, social media, and enhanced e-commerce. The Web 2 app revolution was accelerated by hardware revolution with the launch of the world's first smartphone, the iPhone, in the year 2007. In the Web 2 iteration, apps were no longer read-only. They could be used to read and write simultaneously, which opened the doors to consumer-created shared content. This revolutionized social and economic interactions, bringing producers and consumers of information, goods, and services closer together. But Web 2 has come with a catch. It requires a middleman, a platform that acts as a trusted intermediary between two or more parties. These intermediaries come at a cost, either through charging high transaction fees or through monetization and sometimes exploitation of consumer data and producer content. In contrast, Web 3 leverages blockchain as a trust protocol connecting people peer-to-peer instead of through a third party. This retains the ability for consumers and producers to use trusted transactions to read and write to the Internet, while also allowing people to own their data, identities, and digital content. Web 3 puts people, us, in control of how and when our data and media are used, and by whom, while also granting us the ability to individually monetize our time, attention, data, goods, and services. This shifts the Internet from a place where we can publish and share information to where we can mint tokens, thereby transacting things of value directly with each other, no middleman, peer-to-peer. A tokenized Internet where we read, write, own, making this Web 3 iteration of the Internet of value. Would you like to read more about Web 3? To learn more about Web 3, check out the World Economic Forum's post titled Web 3, the hype and how it can transform the Internet on the WEF website at weforum.org.